1. Jack Johnson. The original problem the sport didn't know how to handle. Back in the early 1900s, Jack Johnson was the heavyweight. His skills, defense, and pure ring IQ were miles ahead of his time. But what really made him a target was how easily he dismantled white opponents during an era of extreme racial tension. Johnson's domination in the ring wasn't just athletic, it challenged the entire social order, and the boxing world didn't take it well. Promoters and state commissions weren't subtle about trying to stop him. After he became the heavyweight champ in 1908, many states flat out banned interracial fights with the goal of preventing Johnson from embarrassing white challengers. Even when he traveled internationally to get fights, he was under constant scrutiny. But the biggest blow came with the so-called White Hope movement, which pressured promoters to find white fighters to take him down. When that didn't work, they turned to legal loopholes, arresting Johnson for violating the Mann Act in 1913, accused of transporting a woman across state lines for immoral purposes. Spoiler alert, it was his girlfriend. The rule changes weren't in the ring, but in the rule book of society. Johnson's dominance led to state-level bans, political prosecutions, and social restrictions aimed directly at keeping him out of the spotlight. His legacy forced boxing and the entire America to eventually reckon with its racial barriers, paving the way for every future black champion. But decades later, another man would step into the ring and unleash a level of brutality the sport had never seen before. 2. Mike Tyson Iron. Mike, as he was famously known, didn't just defeat opponents, he brutalized them. And sometimes that brutality completely disregarded the rulebook. Tyson's ferocity in the 80s was like nothing boxing had ever seen. He was a wrecking ball with gloves. Quick, powerful, and terrifying, Tyson often finished fights before his opponents even realized what hit them. But his style raised a problem for officials. How do you handle someone who can end careers with a single punch or headbutt, or elbow, or, bite? After his infamous 1997 rematch with Evander Holyfield, the ear bite, the Nevada State Athletic Commission had to step in. Tyson was disqualified, fined $3 million, and had his boxing license revoked. The fallout triggered stricter language and commission rules about intentional fouls, disqualifications, and medical examinations. But that wasn't all. Tyson's earlier fights often included excessive clinching, head movement that bordered on butting, and fierce post-bell exchanges. The ABC, Association of Boxing Commissions, and state regulators started tightening rules around pre-fight medical screenings, suspensions, and stricter interpretation of disqualification-worthy fouls. All of this helped standardize boxing's foul system across commissions. Iron Mike's raw power forced the sport to better define fighter safety, legal blows, and punishments for outrageous fouls. Even though he lost his license for a while, Tyson's impact permanently shaped how commissions govern foul play. If you're enjoying this video, please hit that like button and subscribe. I've got plenty more coming your way. But while Tyson bent the rules with pure violence, one man found a way to bend them with deception, and he only needed a roll of hand wraps to do it. 3. Antonio Margarito. When Margarito stepped into the ring, many thought they were watching a tough-as-nails pressure fighter. Turns out, they were watching something a lot more sinister. In 2009, right before his bout with Shane Mosley, Margarito's team got caught red-handed, loading his hand wraps with a plaster-like substance that hardened as it dried. This wasn't just cheating, it was a weapon disguised as legal equipment. After the scandal broke, commissions worldwide freaked out. California's State Athletic Commission immediately revoked Margarito's license, but the consequences didn't stop there. Boxing organizations and state commissions tightened up glove and hand wrap inspections across the board. Inspectors were now required to be physically present during hand wrapping, observe every stage of the process, and thoroughly check for any illegal inserts or tampering. The entire scandal forced boxing to adopt stricter pre-fight inspection protocols to ensure nothing like Margarito's case ever happens again. Fighters now have less privacy in the dressing room than ever before, all thanks to one wrap job gone horribly wrong. While Margarito returned to the ring eventually, his name became synonymous with one of the most infamous cheating scandals in boxing history. His attempted shortcut forced the sport to double down on fighter safety and transparency behind closed doors. But not all rule changes were born from cheating. Some came from pure genius, and no one forced boxing to evolve quite like the greatest Muhammad Ali. 4. Muhammad Ali, the man who changed everything, both in and out of the ring. Ali's impact wasn't limited to his dazzling footwork, blistering speed, or impossible defense. His influence forced changes in how boxing handled everything, from scoring to fighter eligibility. First, his rope-a-dope strategy in the 1974 Rumble in the Jungle versus George Foreman raised questions about allowing fighters to intentionally take punishment while waiting for opponents to tire. Some commissions briefly considered whether sustained passivity could be considered a foul, but ultimately the tactic remained legal, though controversial. The bigger rule change came earlier, when Ali refused induction into the U.S. military during the Vietnam War. As punishment, state commissions stripped him of his license and boxing authorities stripped him of his titles. The Supreme Court later overturned his conviction, but the entire situation forced boxing organizations to formalize clearer, more standardized rules on when and why titles could be stripped or licenses suspended. Even scoring was indirectly influenced by Ali's footwork-heavy style. Judges were forced to evolve how they awarded rounds, putting more value on clean punching over aggression alone. His dancing feet and defensive mastery rewired how fights were judged. Ali's legacy didn't just change the rules. He made boxing rewrite the entire rule book for how a champion is treated, both in competition and in protest. But while Ali danced his way into rule books, one man barely got touched at all, and somehow made the judges scramble to change everything. 5. Floyd Mayweather Jr. Floyd's nickname is Money, but it could have easily been the rule maker. Mayweather's ultra-defensive counter-punching style frustrated fans and fighters alike. His shoulder roll, elusive head movement, and surgical accuracy made him nearly impossible to hit clean. So how do you stop someone who simply refuses to be hit? While no specific Mayweather rule was ever written directly for him, his dominance forced boxing commissions to modernize scoring guidelines. Clean, effective punching, ring generalship, and defense became more heavily weighted, shifting focus away from simple aggression. Without these changes, many of Mayweather's fights might have gone to more aggressive but less effective opponents. But Floyd didn't stop there. He also influenced rule tweaks outside the ring. His extravagant catchweight fights, selective opponent negotiations, and creative scheduling forced sanctioning bodies to address weight cutting, medical clearances, and sanctioning fees. The Nevada Commission became far more meticulous in regulating catchweights, and the size of rehydration clauses after Mayweather's fights pushed the gray area of weight negotiations. And let's not forget his multi-fight deals with Showtime. Those changed how TV networks structured contracts, leading to the rise of fighter-driven PPV events we see today. Mayweather never broke the rules. He simply exposed every loophole, and in doing so, forced the entire sport to tighten up. But long before Floyd played the game like chess, one fighter was playing possum and tricking both his opponents and the rulebook. 6. Kid McCoy. Now this one's old school, like black and white photo old school. Kid McCoy, who fought in the late 1800s and early 1900s, was famous not just for his boxing skills, but for his clever tactics. One of his most notorious moves was the infamous McCoy fake. He'd pretend to be hurt, wobbling and staggering, luring opponents in for the kill, and then crack them with a vicious counter. His fake-outs were so convincing that referees, fighters, and fans couldn't tell whether he was playing possum or actually injured. Eventually, commissions grew concerned about these kinds of deceptive tactics. Several regional bodies began issuing guidelines against deliberate feigning of injury. In some cases, fighters could be disqualified for faking a knockdown or feigning being hurt to draw illegal blows. These early versions of no acting rules remain part of unsportsmanlike conduct guidelines to this day. McCoy's legacy is known for turning mind games into an art form and forced boxing to finally differentiate between real skill and cheap deception. But while McCoy tricked his opponents by always playing smart, one fighter just couldn't stop breaking one of boxing's most basic rules, hitting below the belt. 7. Andrew Golota. Golota's nickname could have easily been Low Blow Legend for all the wrong reasons. In his infamous 1996 bouts with Riddick Bowe, Golota delivered more low blows than actual legal punches. Despite winning many rounds based on skill alone, he simply couldn't stop hitting below the belt. Both fights ended in disqualification due to repeated fouls, and one post-fight melee even broke out in the ring afterward. These ugly scenes triggered athletic commissions to re-examine how referees deal with excessive fouling. The Association of Boxing Commissions pushed for stricter foul point deductions, quicker disqualification authority, and more oversight during championship bouts. Referees were retrained to crack down earlier on intentional low blows, instead of allowing multiple warnings before taking action. Additionally, the Golota mess spurred more medical protocols for opponents fouled excessively below the belt, with improved ringside evaluations to ensure fighter safety. Golota had the tools to be great, but his inability to fight clean forced officials to put fighter safety and foul enforcement at the forefront of officiating. But while Golota made refs enforce fouls faster, another superstar would force boxing to change how it policed fighters before they even step into the ring. 8. Manny Pacquiao's rise led to one of the most subtle but critical rule shifts: drug testing. In the late 2000s, as Pacquiao rose through weight classes at an incredible pace, whispers and rumors about possible PED use followed him. Though Pacquiao was never proven guilty, the controversy surrounding his proposed mega fight with Mayweather changed the landscape. Negotiations for their 2010 fight stalled because Mayweather demanded Olympic-style drug testing, while Pacquiao initially refused. Though the fight didn't happen until 2015, the conversation changed forever. The fallout sparked a push for stricter, more uniform drug testing protocols under organizations like VADA, Voluntary Anti-Doping Association, and USADA, United States Anti-Doping Agency. As a result, elite-level boxing adopted far more advanced, year-round random testing protocols for major fights, particularly championship-level bouts. Today, fighters are subject to rigorous testing during training camps and even outside scheduled competition. Pacquiao never failed a test, but the cloud of suspicion and the fight negotiations forced boxing to modernize its approach to anti-doping and make testing as common as hand wraps and gloves. But Pacquiao wasn't the only one to shake up the system. There were others who forced boxing to rethink everything from weight cuts to glove size, and we're just getting started. 9. Sugar Ray Leonard. Sugar Ray wasn't just slick, he was a master of strategy. And that strategy forced boxing to reconsider how comebacks and retirements are handled. Leonard's first retirement came in 1982. Then he returned in 84, retired again, returned in 87 to beat Marvin Hagler in one of the most controversial decisions in boxing history. Then he went back to retirement and still came back again. You get the idea. His multiple retirements and his ability to instantly book major fights after long layoffs sparked complaints from contenders, promoters, and commissions. How could a guy jump the line in headline fights without working through rankings or tune-ups? In response, sanctioning bodies like the WBC and WBA quietly began revising their internal criteria for fighter rankings and mandatory challenger enforcement. Commissions also started requiring more extensive medical testing for returning fighters, especially those coming off long layoffs or retirement. Age, inactivity, and injury history became key factors in licensing decisions. Leonard didn't break the rules. He bent reality. His name may not be attached to an official rule, but he forced the sport to ask, when does a legend stop being eligible just because he's famous? And while Leonard danced around retirement, another fighter fought so relentlessly that boxing had to limit how many rounds fighters could go to survive him. 10. Henry Armstrong. They called him Homicide Hank for a reason. Armstrong was a one-man hurricane. In the 1930s, he pulled off something that no one has done since, holding world titles in 3 weight classes at the same time: featherweight, lightweight, and welterweight. And keep in mind, this was back when title defenses were brutal, non-stop, and often scheduled for 15 rounds. Armstrong's relentless pressure style didn't give opponents a moment to breathe. He didn't ever stop. He threw hundreds of punches per round and turned every bout into a war of attrition. Fighters were getting wrecked and fans were thrilled, but the doctors, not so much. Armstrong's dominance, along with the deaths and severe injuries piling up in the era, led boxing authorities to rethink the toll of extended fights. By the late 1960s and into the 80s, the championship round limit was slowly reduced from 15 to 12 rounds, largely to reduce late fight collapses. While Armstrong wasn't the only reason for the change, his style made the dangers of endless pace impossible to ignore. Fewer rounds meant more urgency, more action, and less trauma. Armstrong pushed human endurance so far that boxing had to pull it back. But while Armstrong broke opponents with pressure, one fighter made everyone question if a champion could actually lose and still walk out with the belt. 11. Bernard Hopkins, the executioner, the alien, the man who made boxing rethink what it meant to be a champion. Bernard Hopkins was a master at bending the rules, legally. He'd fight dirty without crossing the line. He'd headbutt in the clinch, hit off breaks, and use every second of the clock to his advantage. But the real shakeup came in 2001, when Hopkins unified the WBA, WBC, and IBF middleweight titles, and then refused to pay a sanctioning fee to one of the organizations. Instead of fighting their mandatory, he went for bigger money. In retaliation, the WBA stripped him of their belt. The problem was that even the fans, media, and broadcasters still recognized him as the real champ. The chaos pushed major sanctioning bodies to rethink how mandatory defenses, sanctioning fees, and title stripping worked. It led to the formation of super or franchise champions, looser title consolidation rules, and unified champions being given more leeway on scheduling defenses. Hopkins also fought well into his 50s, prompting tighter medical requirements for aging fighters, including vision tests, MRIs, and stamina assessments. Bernard Hopkins didn't just fight the man in front of him, he fought the system and made it blink. And then there was a man who needed no belts to matter, because even his feet were breaking the rules. 12th, Vasyl Lomachenko. Loma didn't just walk into the ring, he glitched into it. Vasyl to fight for a world title in just his second professional bout. Sanctioning bodies bent the rules, citing his Olympic pedigree. The backlash was immediate. Fighters who'd spent years climbing the ladder called it favoritism. In response, commissions and sanctioning bodies introduced new rules requiring minimum fight experience before title eligibility, unless a fighter met specific criteria like Olympic gold or world championship status. Additionally, Loma's wild pivot step combos led trainers to petition for more explicit enforcement of punching range rules. Was it legal to land punches while standing behind your opponent? If you've seen Lomachenko, you know why that was even a question. He didn't just outclass his opponents, he outcoded the system and boxing had to catch up. But while Loma moved like a ghost, one heavyweight hit harder than a hammer and forced the entire sport to add a little more padding. 13. Deontay Wilder. Deontay Wilder's right hand didn't just knock people out, it launched them into other dimensions. His knockout ratio is the stuff of legend. 42 KOs and 43 wins at one point. It was like a human trebuchet with gloves. But as his legend grew, so did concern over fighter safety and equipment. after multiple opponents complained of long-term damage and 2 collapsed eardrums in a single fight. Yes, 2. Boxing commissions began reviewing padding standards for both gloves and headgear, especially in sparring. Wilder's punches were so powerful that trainers and state officials pushed for minimum glove thickness, better punch resistance ratings, and more controlled sparring regulations leading into big fights. Some even suggested limiting how often knockout specialists could fight per year, especially in certain jurisdictions. Wilder never fought dirty, he just hit too hard. And that raw power forced a new conversation. How much is too much? While Wilder made even officials fear his brute strength, one fighter made them fear the clock. Catorce, Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. Chavez wasn't just a machine. He was the pride of Mexico, a relentless come-forward volume puncher with over 100 professional fights. But his most controversial moment came in 1993 against Meldrick Taylor, one of the most debated stoppages in boxing history. With just 2 seconds left in the final round, Taylor was ahead on points, but he got caught hard and Chavez landed a brutal right. Taylor got up dazed and referee Richard Steele waved it off. Chavez won. Taylor was so devastated, and boxing changed. The controversy forced commissions to revisit standing 8 counts, fight clock visibility, and referee discretion in final seconds. Many jurisdictions updated rules so the timekeeper and referee had synchronized visual countdown systems. Some even considered stopping fights only after a round officially ends, not mid-count. It also sparked new training and guidelines for refs in handling end-of-round scenarios. Chavez's final second comeback forced boxing to rethink whether the bell should be stronger than the blow. But while Chavez's wars were loud and brutal, the next fighter changed boxing with silence, not from knockouts, but from bored crowds watching a masterclass they couldn't understand. 15. Guillermo Rigondeaux. Rigondeaux was so good, but as fans booed greatness, that's when you know things are getting weird. The Cuban technician wasn't flashy, loud, or dramatic, but in the ring, he was a surgeon. Rigondeaux used angles, perfect footwork, and surgical counters to completely neutralize his opponents. The problem is that he was too good and too boring, at least according to fans, promoters, and even commentators. In his fights against Nonito Donaire and Joseph Agbeko, Rigondeaux's defensive wizardry had opponents barely throwing punches, and the crowd barely staying awake. The backlash was so strong that major promoters like Top Rank started avoiding putting him in high-profile events. But that wasn't the only effect. Commissions began nudging judges to reward aggression more visibly. Scoring guidelines began emphasizing effective aggression over sheer ring generalship. In some jurisdictions, trainers were even encouraged to keep fighters more active, under threat of being labeled non-competitive. Rigondeaux didn't break boxing. He revealed its uncomfortable truth. Sometimes technical mastery isn't what people pay to see. But while Rigondeaux shut opponents down with technicality, one fighter shut down the entire sport by refusing to play by its rules, both inside or outside the ring. 16. Sonny Liston. Sonny Liston was fear in human form, massive reach, crushing power, and cold stare. But it wasn't just his fists that terrified people. It was who he was outside the ring that made boxing panic. With alleged mob connections and a mysterious past, Liston was one of the most controversial champions of his time. But what really pushed things over the edge was his 1964 bout with Muhammad Ali, then Cassius Clay. After being battered, Liston quit on his stool. Then came the bizarre 1965 rematch, the famous Phantom Punch knockout. The controversy was so big that Congress got involved. Hearings were held, investigations launched, and for the first time, commissions began demanding more transparency from promoters. Sanctioning bodies strengthened rules around fighter contracts, suspicious betting lines, and third-party management. Liston never got a proper redemption arc. But his fights and their surrounding chaos forced boxing to modernize how it policed the business side of the sport. And while Liston scared people before the bell, one fighter took control after the bell and made boxing rethink the role of the referee altogether. 17. Roy Jones Jr. At his peak, Roy Jones Jr. didn't just beat opponents, he embarrassed them. Hands behind his back, dancing, taunting, and still landing pinpoint shots from angles that made no sense. But it wasn't one of his wins that forced boxing to change. It was a loss. In the 1988 Seoul Olympics, Jones dominated Park Si-hun, landing 86 punches to 32. Literally, everyone thought he won. But the judges gave it to Park. The outrage was instant and global. It led to the biggest overhaul in Olympic boxing history. The judging system was replaced with computerized scoring, anonymous judges, and new accountability rules. Amateur boxing was never the same. Even pro boxing took notice. Stateside commissions improved judge training, introduced mandatory reviews for controversial decisions, and required detailed explanations of scoring in title bouts. Roy Jones didn't get his gold medal, but he got something bigger, a rule book that never let a robbery like that go unchecked again. But while Jones made judges tighten up, one fighter made boxing tighten everything: gloves, licensing, and even his own age group. 18. Jake Paul. Yeah, we're going there. Say what you want about Jake Paul, YouTuber, influencer, meme generator, but his entry into professional boxing flipped the script. Literally, he turned the sport into an event again, but with it came chaos the commissions weren't ready for. Fighting former MMA fighters, low-ranked pros, and even a basketball player, Jake generated massive pay-per-views, but with little regulation. So commissions across the US began re-evaluating who gets licensed. Age, experience, training footage, all of it came under scrutiny. Some even introduced stricter exhibition fight rules to distinguish them from official pro bouts. Jake's events also pushed athletic commissions to ramp up media policies, fighter disclosure requirements, and financial transparency, especially with fighter pay. And here's the wildest part. Jake helped usher in better pay standards for undercard fighters. Yep, his loud, brash, chaotic presence actually sparked real conversations about fighter rights. Jake didn't change boxing with his fists, he changed it with followers. And that influence made the rulebook go viral. But while Jake forced boxing to modernize from the outside, one old school champ did the same thing from deep inside the clinch. 19th. Lennox Lewis. Lennox Lewis had a jab that felt like a steel beam. He was technically sound, incredibly strong, and, most of the time, in total control. But what set him apart wasn't just skill, it was how he used the clinch. Lewis made the clinch into a tactical weapon. He'd jab, then wrap up his opponent before they could return fire. Over and over. It frustrated fighters, it frustrated fans, but it worked. After complaints piled up, especially from smaller opponents, commissions began pressuring refs to limit clinch tolerance. Officials were retrained to break holds faster, issue warnings quicker, and encourage more open action. Even the WBC issued memos to referees to discourage overuse of holding in championship bouts. The clinch has always been part of the game, but Lennox showed how easily it could become the game, unless the rules fought back. Now let's turn to one of the most mysterious names in boxing. A legend who didn't fight in the ring, but his actions created one of the most important boxing rules ever made. 20. Duk Koo Kim. Duk Koo Kim wasn't a household name before his fight with Ray Boom Boom Mancini in 1982, but that one night changed boxing forever. It was brutal, a 14-round war where both men gave everything. But in the final round, Mancini landed a devastating combination, and Kim collapsed. He never regained consciousness as he died 4 days later from a brain hemorrhage. The tragedy rocked the boxing world, and it didn't stop in the ring. Kim's mother died by suicide shortly after, and the referee, Richard Green, took his own life the following year. It was a ripple effect that shook the sport to its core. Within months, boxing's governing bodies reduced the maximum number of rounds in title fights from 15 to 12, a change that remains in place to this day. Medical checks were overhauled, referee stoppage guidelines were updated, and fighters' corner responsibilities became more strictly defined. Duk Koo Kim's loss wasn't in vain. His name doesn't show up on many highlight reels, but it echoes in every round 13 that never happens, every early stoppage that saves a life, and every ref who knows when to say enough. But just years later, boxing would be faced with the opposite question. What happens when a ref stops a fight? Maybe too soon? 21st. Meldrick Taylor. Meldrick Taylor was speed personified, a lightning-fast Olympic gold medalist who could throw 5-punch combinations before most guys finished one. His career-defining moment came in 1990 against Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. For 12 rounds, Taylor was putting on a clinic. He was ahead on all scorecards. Then, the final round happened as he took a vicious right hand with just seconds left. He beat the count, but referee Richard Steele waved it off with 2 seconds left on the clock. That one moment led to a widespread outcry and new debates about referee discretion versus the clock. As a result, commissions began implementing more referee training focused specifically on late round awareness and more formalized protocols for end-of-round scenarios. The Taylor-Chavez fight also triggered calls for independent scoring monitors and real-time updates for corner teams, so trainers could make smarter decisions about whether to throw in the towel late. Meldrick Taylor didn't lose just a fight, he lost a legacy moment, but that final 2 seconds led to real-time reforms that still impact how refs call close fights today. And while Taylor's heartbreak came at the buzzer, one heavyweight's entire strategy made the judges rethink how rounds are even scored. 22nd, Tyson Fury. The Gypsy King doesn't fight like a big man, he fights like a magician trapped in a heavyweight's body. He slips, he feints, he boxes, and then, boom, he crushes you. But early in Fury's career, his fights caused confusion around scoring criteria. Was he winning rounds with feints and flick jabs, or was he coasting while his opponents landed harder, cleaner shots? One of the biggest debates came after his first fight with Deontay Wilder in 2018. Despite Fury outlanding Wilder in 9 of 12 rounds and dominating the fight outside of 2 knockdowns, the bout was ruled a draw. The public outcry was massive. That led to the WBC updating its scoring explanations with more emphasis on clear definitions, what counts as effective aggression, ring generalship, and how judges should weigh power versus control. It also led to increased adoption of open scoring in non-title fights across various countries, and mandatory judge retraining in jurisdictions like California and the UK. Fury's footwork didn't just dodge punches, it dodged boxing's old scoring assumptions, and the judges had to catch up. But while Fury floated through fights, the next man bulldozed through bodies and forced boxing to change the gloves themselves. 23rd, Joe Frazier. Smokin' Joe was a human pressure cooker. Short, stocky, and built like a fire hydrant with fists. Frazier fought with his head down and his hands moving non-stop, but his style of relentless pressure and head-first movement made him take as much damage as he gave. After the thriller in Manila against Ali, both men left pieces of themselves in the ring. Frazier's face was swollen shut. Ali called it the closest thing to death. That level of punishment helped prompt changes to glove padding regulations, especially concerning knuckle protection. New glove models were developed with enhanced wrist support and more shock absorption to reduce long-term damage. His brawling also encouraged commissions to tighten medical suspensions and implement stricter post-fight checkups, including optical nerve exams and cumulative trauma evaluations. Frazier's fights were legendary, but they also showed that sometimes heart and toughness aren't enough. The rules need to protect fighters from themselves. And speaking of taking damage, the next fighter turned headbutts into an offensive weapon. 24th, Evander Holyfield. The real deal wasn't dirty, but he walked that fine line really well. Holyfield's aggressive come-forward style included a lot of clinch fighting, use of the head, and gritty inside tactics. But when opponents like Mike Tyson started accusing him of intentional headbutts, the refs and commissions took notice. During his fights with Tyson, Lennox Lewis, and even Riddick Bowe, Holyfield frequently ducked into head clashes. He wasn't doing anything illegal, at least not by the letter of the rulebook, but the optics got bad. As a result, many state commissions, including Nevada, introduced more detailed language around headbutting with clearer definitions of incidental versus intentional. Refs were trained to issue warnings quicker, and new video review systems were set up to help classify fouls post-fight. Holyfield's style didn't just wear down opponents, it forced boxing to update how they call the most common and most dangerous accidental foul in the game. And finally, our last entry isn't about punches, gloves, or judges. It's about one man who forced boxing to answer a simple question: what if someone dies? And no one is punished. 25, Louis Resto. This one isn't just a dark chapter, it's one that changed boxing forever. In 1983, Louis Resto stepped into the ring against Billy Collins Jr. Resto was the underdog, but as the fight went on, Collins' face began to swell abnormally fast. Something was off. After the fight, Collins' team grabbed Resto's gloves. They were soft, too soft. Turns out the padding had been illegally removed by Resto's trainer, Panama Lewis. It wasn't just a cheat, it was a crime. Collins suffered permanent damage as he spiraled mentally and died months later in a car crash many believe was suicide. The fallout led to a criminal investigation, and both Resto and Lewis were not only banned from boxing for life, they also served prison time. After this, boxing overhauled glove inspection rules. Commissions introduced tamper-evident tape, required multiple officials to sign off on hand wrapping and gloving, and even began filming locker room prep for title fights. Louis Resto didn't just get caught, he changed how boxing guards its most sacred rule: the fairness and safety of the fight. And there you have it, the fighters who didn't just win fights, they changed the rules. If you enjoyed this, hit like, drop your pick for the biggest rule change in the comments, and subscribe for more boxing breakdowns. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.